Hello, my journey didn't go as planned. I had intended to attend a conference in Minneapolis on Thursday and Friday, but things didn't turn out that way. Normally, my wife Emily would take half a day off to make my departure special, but this time, she just gave me a quick peck on the cheek and rushed off to work. Let me give you some background. My name is John. I'm 49 years old, and Emily and I have been married for 24 years. We have two kids, Michael, who's 22, and Sarah, who just turned 20. I left work at 3 p.m. and headed straight to the airport for my 6 p.m. flight. I like to get there early to avoid the stress of last-minute rushing. As I waited for my flight, everything seemed to be going smoothly. But luck wasn't on my side this time. The flight to Minnesota got delayed because of bad weather and an approaching snowstorm. After a 45-minute delay, we finally boarded the plane. About 30 minutes after takeoff, I noticed the plane making a slight left turn. At first, I thought it was a minor course correction, but soon it was clear we were heading back. The pilot confirmed that due to the heavy snowstorm, we couldn't land in Minneapolis, and we had to return to our original airport. Once we were back on the ground, I rushed to the airline counter to rearrange my travel plans for the next morning. Fortunately, I snagged one of the last available seats on the next flight. Even though I missed the conference, I was determined to get there. I called my contact in Minneapolis to explain the delay and left a detailed message on my boss's voicemail. Feeling anxious, I called home, hoping to hear Emily's comforting voice. She didn't answer, and the house was dark with her car missing from the garage. I left my luggage in the car and cautiously entered the house. Voices from the living room surprised me, but it turned out to be the TV left on. This realization led to an unsettling conclusion. Emily had come home after work, and I distinctly remembered her turning off the TV before leaving. Turning off the TV, I searched for any signs of her presence but found none. Anxiously, I dialed her mobile number. When she finally answered, her voice was warm as she asked about my whereabouts, a question that had become routine in our marriage but now tinged with a strange mix of concern and curiosity. She claimed she had been home watching TV. As we talked, the fatigue of my long journey began to catch up with me. At that moment, I just wanted to be with my wife, seeking comfort in her presence and sharing some intimate moments, even if only for a short while. Despite the flight delay, I held on to the hope of spending a few unexpected hours of joy in the comfort of our own bed. However, within seconds, the joy of coming home was overshadowed by a deep sense of uncertainty. Instead of expecting the warm embrace of the woman I loved and trusted for 24 years, I was struck by the harsh reality of lies and betrayal. It was an unforeseen blow that left me speechless and devoid of trust. I couldn't help but wonder if she had really deceived me, and if so, why? There was no logical reason for her betrayal. Regardless of whether it happened at work, with friends, or elsewhere, I probably remained silent for some time, as Emily's voice, full of concern, eventually interrupted my thoughts, asking if I was still there. I came back to reality and muttered, yes, sorry. We landed at O'Hare, and I need to go." With a heavy heart, I ended the conversation abruptly. The phone rang again, but I turned it off, wanting to be alone to process my distressing thoughts. Sitting on the couch, surrounded by silence and emptiness, a sense of numbness enveloped me. The question haunted me. Why would Emily deceive me? Perhaps there was a logical reason for the lie. Maybe she was planning a surprise. I remembered how, 4 years ago, she had orchestrated a series of deceptions for our 20th wedding anniversary. She had secretly planned a 2-week cruise and involved her boss and parents, weaving a complicated web of lies. These memories flooded my mind, adding to my confusion. In the midst of my turmoil, an obsessive thought crept into my mind, which I rejected with determination. Not us. We couldn't be in such a situation. It was simply unthinkable. But there it was, facing the possibility. Realizing that my daughter Sarah might know about any surprise or plan Emily might have, I quickly dialed her number from memory. The voice of my beloved daughter greeted me on the phone, asking how I was. I inquired about her well-being, and she replied that she had just finished her homework and was watching TV. Sensing the importance of the moment, I carefully asked if she had recently spoken to her mother, and if Emily had mentioned anything unusual. Sarah said they had their usual weekly phone call on Sunday, which gave me a glimmer of hope. Then I asked if she knew anything about a surprise Emily might be planning. I emphasized to Sarah that I didn't want to know the details of the surprise, just if Emily was planning something. My voice had a note of impatience as I awaited her response. However, Sarah's response shattered my hopes. She said she knew nothing and asked what was going on, clearly not grasping my concern. Desperate for a plausible explanation, I told her that Emily had been acting a little strange lately and wondered if she was hiding a surprise, perhaps for my 50th birthday. Sarah quickly dismissed the idea, reminding me that we had already celebrated my birthday last month. Realizing I wouldn't get answers from her, I accepted reality and wished my daughter a good night. Her disheartened response made it clear that the surprise I hoped for wouldn't come true. But the question remained, why would Emily deceive me? Various explanations swirled in my head. Maybe it had to do with an upcoming promotion. It seemed plausible, although I couldn't understand why she would lie about it. Perhaps she was still trying to achieve that elusive promotion. Lately, she had been working late because of her dedication. But deep down, I knew that Emily understood that no promotion was worth the time we had lost together. She knew I wanted her to reduce her work hours so we could spend more time together, a request she understood well. Ironically, I remembered a major decision I made a few months before our 20th anniversary. I had turned down a promotion almost 5 years ago. I eagerly accepted the offer to be vice president of finance at my company. This role required frequent trips to the company's headquarters in Chicago for board meetings and visits to various plants across the country. Initially, I was excited about the job offer, but Emily quickly expressed her doubts, making me reconsider my decision. The unsettling story of a colleague who divorced just 2 years after accepting a similar position could not be ignored. Although he achieved financial success, it was at the cost of loneliness and suffering. Given our circumstances, and the fact that our children still needed support in their final years of school, Emily didn't want to take on that responsibility alone. For a week, we had tense discussions about the possible consequences of accepting the promotion. Gradually, it became clear that I was on the verge of losing what truly mattered in my life, my wife and children. Regaining clarity, I made the sincere decision to turn down the promotion, recognizing that my commitment to my family was more important than material success. The last few months had been difficult, as Emily strove for her promotion. This rekindled doubts about my own professional growth. Now that our children were in college, we were left alone. Although Emily believed her promotion was achievable with minimal impact on our lives, like more business trips, I worried about the significant amount of overtime she would have to work. Seeing her only 1 or 2 hours a day during the week left me unsatisfied. The brief moments together were not fulfilling, and the lack of quality time together weighed heavily on my heart. Emily immersed herself more and more in work, spending Saturdays and even Sundays at the office. When she came home, she was so tired that she had no energy for anything else. It was hard to remember the last time we shared intimate moments. The concrete details blurred into an oppressive fog. Acknowledging that age played a role in our decreased physical connection, it was hard to ignore the sad absence of intimacy we once had. Perhaps her deception during our phone call was an attempt to avoid discussing my concerns and hiding behind her work obligations. However, it is fair to recognize that I also traveled a lot for work and sometimes worked overtime. There was a direct way to find out the truth. I decided to call Emily's direct line at the advertising agency to confirm the situation. To my surprise, her colleague Steve Brown answered. Taken aback, I quickly recovered. Expecting to hear Emily's voice, I greeted him using his nickname, and his response baffled me. He mentioned that I should be enjoying my vacation with Emily. Shocked and confused by his comment, it was clear something was wrong. That night, I found myself caught in a web of surprises. I asked Steve about the supposed vacation. Then I quickly recovered, apologized to Steve for the interruption, and made up an excuse, stating that I had dialed his number by mistake. He assured me without any concern, mentioning that Emily owed him lunch for covering her shift and working late. He expressed his disappointment, saying it was 9 p.m. and he was still at work. With that, he ended the conversation and hung up. Gradually, the truth began to clear. Emily was not at work. In fact, she was absent from her position. According to Steve, she had taken vacation until the end of the week. Panic began to invade my mind as fear took hold. Where was Emily? What could she be doing? An unwelcome thought penetrated my mind. No, it couldn't be true. I always strove to see the best in people, maintaining a positive perspective and appreciating the inherent goodness in everyone. But now, against my will, I began to consider the worst-case scenario. Could it really be happening? Could Emily betray me in this way? The idea that she might be with her sister Jessica involuntarily came to mind. Over time, we had distanced ourselves from Jessica and her ex-husband David. We were once incredibly close, united by a friendship that seemed indestructible. Our lives intertwined in a beautiful tapestry of shared experiences, spending evenings together, supporting each other, caring for our children, organizing numerous family gatherings, and even going on vacations together. But everything changed one fateful day when I came home with a throbbing headache. Seeking relief from the pounding migraine, I took a couple of Tylenol and lay down on the couch. About half an hour later, Emily and Jessica returned from their shopping trip, their laughter and chatter filling the room. They didn't notice me, lying there trying to rest. Suddenly, Jessica's voice broke through the noise, asking Emily if she had noticed the new product manager at the grocery store. My heart began to race as I strained to hear Emily's response. She casually confessed that she found him attractive and that he had smiled at her. Then, with a playful tone, Jessica commented that it would be even better if he smiled after their encounter in the back seat of his car the day before. To my complete surprise, my wife responded with disapproval, warning Jessica that she might get caught and risk losing her husband. Jessica, however, shrugged, assuring Emily that she was always careful. With that, they left the room, leaving me in a state of confusion. As someone who values honesty and integrity, I was devastated by what I had just heard. I didn't know what to do and felt completely lost. One thing was clear: David needed to know the truth. Hearing about Jessica's infidelity would undoubtedly break his heart, and this thought weighed on me. I knew David would probably kick Jessica out of the house upon learning of her betrayal. The responsibility for the possible destruction of their marriage was a heavy burden. Did I really want to be the one to bring such momentous news? Before I could make a final decision, Emily came home with our children. Relieved that she didn't approve of her sister's actions, I decided to postpone my decision until I could discuss it further with her. That night, as we prepared for bed, I brought up the topic, seeking her advice. I carefully explained the situation, sharing the news about the discovery of infidelity within our circle. Her facial expression was initially one of shock and uncertainty. When I asked what I should do, and if it was appropriate to confront the unfaithful person with anger, Emily took a moment to consider the situation carefully. She began slowly, suggesting that it might depend on the specific details, and that several factors needed to be considered. Seeking more clarity, I presented hypothetical scenarios, asking about our friend David and if we should ignore if he was unfaithful and picked up a woman at a bar. I wanted to know her perspective. The weight of the situation hung in the air as she considered the possible actions. Suddenly, Emily sat up in bed, clutching her phone, her face a mix of determination and anger. She was ready to call Jessica and confront her about the infidelity. Instinctively, I gently took her phone and told Emily that I would handle the situation myself. Emily looked at me with doubt and concern, asking what was going on. I responded confidently, assuring her that I was sure of my decision and hoped Jessica would face the consequences of her actions. Emily, with a resolute expression, confirmed that we would not allow David to stay with us if he decided to kick Jessica out. She firmly declared that he could find his own place, and that she would not give shelter to an unfaithful person in our house. With a sense of determination, I called David. He answered, his voice full of warmth as he greeted me, his favorite brother-in-law. I began with a heavy sigh, trying to find the right words. After a deep breath, I cautiously continued, warning him that I had heard something disturbing and had some devastating news to share. I told him that Jessica had been unfaithful and had cheated on him just the day before. There was a long pause on the phone as David processed the shocking revelation. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible, full of disbelief. He asked if I was absolutely sure it was his Jessica. I confirmed that I had heard it directly from her mouth, describing it as boasting without any hint of remorse. Offering my condolences, I assured him of our support and said we would be there for him and the children. David thanked me and hung up, leaving me feeling the weight of the situation. Emily looked at me, her eyes filled with sadness and tears. She whispered that she was proud of me and asked for a hug. Feeling heartbroken and scared, I hugged her, offering some comfort in the midst of so much uncertainty. After a moment of calm, I suggested they consider the possibility of seeing a therapist to help deal with the situation. Emily, exhausted and doubtful, murmured that she wasn't sure therapy would change anything, pointing out that when someone cheats once, they tend to do it again. I nodded silently in agreement with her. In the middle of the night, the phone rang, waking me from a restless sleep. Groggy and trying not to disturb Emily, I answered. On the other end of the line was Jessica, her voice full of anger, demanding to know what I had told David. I calmly replied, telling her I had told the truth and emphasizing the importance of honesty. Emily, observing with concern, listened as Jessica's voice became even angrier, accusing me of betrayal. I responded firmly, saying that sometimes the truth comes to the surface in unexpected ways and that the unfaithful must face the consequences of their actions. Jessica's tears resonated through the phone as she confessed that David had kicked her out of the house. I repeated that it was a deserved consequence. Desperate, she asked for advice, asking if she could stay with us. Reluctantly, I told her we couldn't offer shelter to someone who had betrayed their spouse and that she would have to manage on her own. She seemed surprised by my response, her pleas becoming more desperate. I turned to Emily for support, asking what to say to Jessica. Emily leaned towards the phone and firmly declared that she didn't want an unfaithful person in her house and told Jessica to find another place to stay. Then, I conveyed our final message from both of us. Jessica was no longer welcome in our lives and had to stay away. We didn't want her to come or call. Emily got closer to me, and we sought comfort in each other's arms. She whispered that she was proud of how I handled the situation, and we fell asleep peacefully. The next morning, however, brought an unexpected confrontation. Emily's father called, his voice full of anger, demanding to know why we had distanced ourselves from Jessica. Emily, distressed and in tears after the call, looked at me for support. I reminded her that we had made this decision together after numerous discussions, and that it was necessary to cut our ties with someone who had caused so much pain. I explained that I had only mentioned a hypothetical scenario about David, and wasn't implying that he had actually cheated on Jessica. I posed the difficult question, asking how David's possible infidelity was different from Jessica's infidelity. Emily defended her sister, stating that Jessica was family. I expressed my disappointment, asking if it was acceptable to justify betrayal just because they were family. Emily was silent for a moment, unable to justify her position. 3 years ago, I had an important conversation with Emily, clearly explaining that I didn't want Jessica around our children or in our house. Although Emily sometimes met secretly with her sister, this was an unspoken taboo in our home, and she visited her secretly while I was away. Over time, David managed to move on and prepare to remarry, and my aversion to Jessica diminished. I stopped worrying about her presence, finding comfort in her absence. Turning my attention to Emily, I gently broached the subject, feeling the need to address the issue. I suspected that Emily might feel guilty for cheating, although I had reached a point where I no longer cared. Unexpectedly, I found myself on stage in front of a large audience at the conference. I began my speech, addressing the crowd and discussing the two types of people: those who deny reality and those who face it. During my talk, Tom Wilson, Emily's boss, waved his hand wildly and confessed that he avoided my wife. Steve Brown, sitting behind Tom, also confessed that he avoided Emily. Another man joined in with a jocular comment, creating a moment of common understanding and light laughter among the audience. Suddenly, I woke up on the couch, wiping drool from my face. It was already midnight. I'd probably slept for over an hour and wondered if Emily had come home during my sleep, perhaps not realizing my presence. Rushing to the bedroom, I entered but found no sign of her. It occurred to me that she might be with her sister Jessica. Reflecting on whether to contact Jessica and ask about Emily's whereabouts, I hesitated, understanding that getting Jessica's address would require acting behind Emily's back. Remembering that I needed to pick up Jessica's children from a certain place, I wondered if I still had her phone number. Preparing to search my contact list, I noticed the Find My Phone app icon on my smartphone. A year ago, I had installed the app on both phones after losing mine during a trip from New York to Cincinnati. Recognizing its potential, I immediately opened the app. Within seconds, I obtained Emily's phone location. It indicated Lake Mills. I was puzzled, wondering why she might be there. Jessica was facing financial difficulties, making it unlikely she could afford a cabin at Lake Mills. The situation was becoming increasingly mysterious. Lake Mills was known for its luxurious residences, where cabins cost significantly more than our modest home. Using Google Earth, I carefully determined Emily's exact location. To my surprise, she was inside an exclusive estate surrounded by a high stone wall. This discovery left me bewildered. What could Emily be doing in such a luxurious estate? The distance between Lake Mills and our city was an hour's drive, but my determination to uncover the truth drove me forward. Realizing that a direct conversation with Emily would likely result in lies or evasions, I decided I needed irrefutable evidence before confronting her. Filled with intense emotions, I quickly headed to Lake Mills, berating myself for not considering the possibility of Emily acting wrongly before. The remorse consumed me as I realized I should have checked the GPS tracker on her phone from the beginning instead of making excuses for her actions. Uncertainty clouded my thoughts as I arrived at Lake Mills, unsure of my intentions but clinging to the hope of a simple explanation. Anxiously, I approached the estate where Emily was located. In front of me were enormous gates, preventing direct access. I didn't plan to approach the house and announce my presence. Evaluating the situation, I realized that parking by the roadside might attract unwanted attention, possibly resulting in the appearance of security guards or the police in this exclusive area. Driving a little further, I found a narrow path and decided to park there. Getting out, I felt a surge of uncertainty. How was I going to circumvent the high wall that separated me from the truth? Then I realized the estate bordered the lake, meaning I could approach from that side. With renewed determination, I began my path towards the lake, ready to uncover whatever truth awaited me. I reached the lake shore, my heart racing as I looked for a way to enter the property from that direction. Finding a narrow path leading to the water, I cautiously advanced, unsure in which of the luxurious cabins Emily might be. I decided to check the GPS tracker once again. Finally, I arrived at a luxurious estate with several windows lit on the second floor, although the first floor was dimly lit. Only one curtain was slightly open, casting a warm light outside. Seeking a better vantage point, I found a sturdy tree and climbed high enough to see inside. My gaze settled on a man in a white terry robe, older and unknown to me, who quickly disappeared from view. A few minutes later, a woman appeared, and my suspicions were confirmed. It was Jessica. She was standing with the robe open, drinking champagne. Despite everything, I couldn't deny that she still looked attractive for her age. Observing, I began to piece things together. Emily was indeed with her sister, probably dragged into a lifestyle that I neither approved of nor wanted for her. The probability of divorce and the financial burden this could bring seemed to be the explanation for Jessica's actions. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was being drawn into something destructive. Events were unfolding before my eyes, leaving me devastated. The man I had seen earlier approached Jessica, his hands exploring her body, took her champagne glass, and set it aside. I had to look away from this explicit scene, feeling that my traditional values clashed with what I was observing. This was not the love and intimacy I valued. It seemed empty and devoid of any real connection. As I considered climbing down from the tree, I saw Emily. She was sitting on a distant couch with a silly, drunken smile. Her robe was open, revealing a view that sealed the fate of our marriage. Heartbroken, I took a step back and lost my balance. Falling from the tree, the branches broke my fall, and I was lucky to escape with only minor injuries. Dazed, I stood up, feeling the weight of what I had seen. I walked aimlessly back to my car, tears streaming from my eyes. The pain I felt was not from the physical fall, but from the emotional devastation of losing the person I loved. Limping to my car, I briefly considered storming into the estate to confront them, but quickly dismissed the idea. The possible consequences, years in jail for trespassing and assault, made it clear it wasn't the solution. Left alone with my thoughts, a storm of emotions raged inside me. I could no longer deny the harsh truth. The sadness and anger were overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't let the anger consume me. Despite feeling betrayed, I would never resort to physical violence against Emily. As I considered my options, I realized the simplest solution was to go home, pack my things, and leave. If we lived in a state with no-fault divorce, with separate incomes and no dependents, the process would likely be straightforward. We would divide our property and move on. However, a part of me longed for justice and some kind of revenge. A bold idea came to mind. I decided to seize the moment and see how it unfolded. Holding the phone firmly, I dialed Emily's number, anticipating that she might not answer, and I would be redirected to her voicemail. "Hello, darling," I began, projecting my voice into the voicemail. "Since you didn't answer the home phone, I'm calling your mobile. I wanted to inform you so you don't worry when you hear the keys in the door in a few minutes." I explained the chaos of the flight delay due to the snowstorm and the uncertain arrival schedules. I told her that our flight had been diverted to Chicago, but that we were finally on our way back. They couldn't pinpoint the exact landing time, but I estimated I would be home in about 30 minutes. I said goodbye and hung up, knowing Emily would receive a notification of a new voicemail. Curiosity and concern would undoubtedly torment her. Leaving a message at that moment was unusual, adding intrigue. I imagined her reaching for her phone, anxiously checking the voicemail, silently praying she was too drunk to notice the impossibility of using a mobile during a flight. Panic would likely begin to take hold as she realized she might be caught in her lie. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I quickly answered, aware she might be trying to gauge my arrival time. I began the conversation in a tired tone, apologizing for waking her. She responded, assuring me it was fine, and informed me she was heading home, hoping to arrive in about an hour. I accepted her response, and she quickly ended the call. Soon, I saw her car exit the estate gates and speed down the road. My heart raced as I observed her reckless driving, nearly veering off the edge. It became evident she was much more intoxicated than I had assumed. Despite my anger and frustration, I also felt a deep sadness for what our relationship had become. Watching Emily's reckless driving, I realized she was not only endangering her own life, but also the lives of others on the road. Despite my anger, the thought of her life being at risk, especially as the mother of our children, was unbearable. Determined to ensure her safety, I decided to follow her, ready to intervene if necessary. Quickly, I called emergency services to report a drunk driver. I described her reckless behavior, the near accident, and the dangerous driving, providing details about her car, including the make, model, and the last 4 digits of the license plate. I emphasized the urgency of stopping the car before any harm occurred. The operator assured me that a patrol car was already on its way. Keeping a safe distance, I continued to follow Emily, carefully maneuvering through traffic. 2 exits later, I saw the patrol car approaching. As Emily's car came into view, the patrol car accelerated, lights flashing, signaling her to pull over. I drove past, feeling a mix of relief and deep sadness. 45 minutes later, I arrived home, the weight of the night's events crushing me. The irony and tragedy of the night hit me hard. In one night, the person I loved deeply had reduced her life to a series of unfortunate consequences. The thought that Emily's actions could have resulted in a fatal accident and indescribable pain for our children was sobering. This realization forced me to stop and reflect, allowing my fears and emotions to surface. The fragility and value of life had never felt more real. My love for Emily was no longer the driving force in my decisions. That didn't mean I had stopped loving her, but I no longer saw a future together. I needed time to sort out my thoughts, so I turned off the home phone and silenced my mobile. Reflecting on the night, I realized the simplest explanation for Emily's deceit had been in front of me all along. Disappointed with myself for not seeing it sooner, I opened a bottle of wine and considered my next steps. For years, I believed my love for Emily would age like fine wine, becoming richer and deeper with time. Confronting the harsh reality of our deteriorated relationship, I now faced the difficult question of what to do next. As I sipped the wine, I sought clarity amid the storm of emotions. The love that once defined me now felt like it had turned to vinegar, leaving me in agonizing pain. Her betrayal hurt deeply, but it wasn't just the act itself that stung. It was the realization that the love we had shared for 26 years, 24 of them as spouses, had withered. Without her, I felt lost, like a rudderless soul, stripped of purpose and identity. Could I move on without that love? The pain intensified, and I briefly considered seeking solace in the depths beneath a bridge, a place where I could escape my suffering. Starting a new life seemed an overwhelming task, filled with uncertainty. How could I plan a future when the person who was my everything suddenly vanished? I was lost, not knowing where to start. Making decisions without consulting Emily seemed impossible. Family had always been my priority. Every decision I made was carefully thought out for the well-being and happiness of my wife and children. Our social life revolved around our family, and I rarely socialized with colleagues outside of mandatory work events. For the last decade, I sometimes longed for the days when we socialized with colleagues. Now, with the kids gone, it was just Emily and me, and now I found myself alone, consumed by sadness. I no longer had anyone to love, no one to trust. For the first time in my life, loneliness became my unwanted companion. Why did she choose this path? Why resort to betrayal when a straightforward divorce, though painful, would have been more reasonable given the years and happy moments we shared? When did she stop loving me? Or did she simply tolerate our relationship until our children grew up and left? When did her care and attention fade? When our children began their own journeys, I saw this as an opportunity to invest more in Emily and our relationship. I didn't realize she saw this as the end of our path together. I watched as a stranger became a constant presence in her life, indicating a level of comfort, or perhaps deceit that had permeated our lives. Emily and her lover, leaving me isolated and unloved, made it evident that we were no longer a couple. Amid the despair, my pain became a bond with life. It served as a painful reminder of what I had lost, of the best moments we shared, and most importantly, of our children's presence. In this dark moment, my children became my saviors, casting a ray of hope on me. My self-esteem had diminished, and I lacked the strength to pull myself out of the abyss. Only by thinking of Michael and Sarah did I feel a spark of self-preservation. Soon Michael and Sarah would start their own families, and to protect myself from the next wave of pain, I understood that I needed to distance myself from all of this. It was not an easy task, and it was filled with pain. I knew I would always remember Emily and how I loved her, but I would also remember her betrayal. I needed to remove myself from this situation. As I continued to drink, I reflected on the future. Despite the pain, I knew I had to move on, even if the path was uncertain. The love that once defined me had faded, but I still had my children and a life to rebuild. I decided to find a way to navigate the darkness, clinging to the hope that with time I would heal and find a new purpose. I had always been content with a simple life. My family was not wealthy, but we had something much more valuable: deep affection. The material possessions that now surrounded me seemed insignificant in comparison. Reflecting on all I had, I realized that only a few things, a change of clothes, my car, and my laptop, were worth taking with me. The more I reflected, the clearer my path became. I decided to pack my things and disappear without a trace. I could no longer face the woman who had once been my everything, as each encounter would only remind me of my loss and the constant pain within me. With a renewed sense of purpose, I got up and began to act decisively. I quickly packed a few suitcases, a task that took only 30 minutes. Soon I was loading my things into the car. By the time I finished, it was just before 6 a.m. Tired but determined, I decided to take a short nap, sure that Emily would still be in a detoxification state until well into the morning. As I closed my eyes, my thoughts were filled with the idea of starting a new life. The sound of the alarm on my phone woke me up at 9 a.m. Without hesitation, I planned an urgent meeting with a lawyer. After, I took a long shower, hoping to wash away the remnants of my past. With a heavy heart, I removed my wedding ring and solemnly placed it on the table next to the phone. This final act marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life, a chapter where I sought personal freedom and happiness. I decided to write Emily a letter, expressing my disappointment and sadness. Although our conversations had become useless, I felt the need to convey my emotions. Emily, it breaks my heart to admit that you have chosen a path of recklessness and loneliness, similar to your sister's. By the time you read this, I will be completely out of your life. The depth of your betrayal has left me in indescribable pain. Despite everything, I am grateful for the 24 years of happiness we shared, and for our 2 wonderful children. In this farewell, I will be brief. May you quickly return to your new life, leaving behind our broken family. I seek the justice you could not provide. Have your actions brought you satisfaction? The man you were with, judging by his property, was wealthy. I no longer want to see or speak with you. We have nothing more to discuss. Our lawyers will settle everything, and I ask you to sign the divorce papers quickly. The reason for our divorce does not matter. At 10 a.m., I was at the bank, managing our joint credit card debts and closing accounts. I withdrew all our savings and securities, ensuring enough funds in the checking account to cover the mortgage and utility bills for the next 2 months. Taking more steps toward independence, I removed my name from the joint account. After leaving the bank, I held a substantial check, amounting to approximately $250,000. By noon, I arrived at work, surprising my boss, who was expecting me in Minnesota. When I shared the news of my immediate resignation and move, his surprise grew. Our relationship had evolved from a typical employer-employee dynamic to one of mutual respect and understanding. My boss had remained in his position because I had turned down the promotion. Feeling indebted to me during his divorce 2 years ago, I explained that my decision had been influenced by his situation. Since then, our relationship had become more like a partnership. He understood my desire to resign and accepted it. Instead of going through human resources and handling my $41,000, he offered me an opportunity in his new division in Texas. Although the salary would be lower, the available housing options would allow me to start anew. We confirmed our agreement with a handshake, and he agreed to spread the word that I had left the position voluntarily. Then I met with my lawyer to explain my decision to separate from Emily. I instructed him to deliver the divorce papers and gave him power of attorney to sell the house, which represented half of our assets. My lawyer, who was also a close family friend, tried to persuade me to consider alternative options, but soon understood the magnitude of the changes I was making. By midnight, I planned to be in another city, in another state, and without a wife. After lunch, fatigue enveloped me. I looked for a place to rest and found an old-fashioned motel around 8 p.m. Feeling the weight of the day's events, I checked in, hoping for a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. Lying on the bed, I reflected on my decision and the new life that awaited me. The pain of the past was still present, but I hoped that with time it would fade, and I would find a way to recover and heal. Using a disposable phone I had bought for this purpose, I dialed Michael's number. He quickly answered, and I informed him that this was my new number. His voice immediately filled with concern as he asked if he had heard anything from Mom. I sighed deeply and revealed the painful truth. I had discovered Emily's betrayal the day before. Michael was stunned, his disappointment and concern palpable through the phone. He asked what I planned to do next. I explained that I had already taken steps. I packed my things, closed our joint bank accounts, resigned from my job, and was heading south to start a new chapter. I assured him that Emily would receive the divorce papers by the end of the week. Michael, still processing the news, asked if Sarah knew. I said she didn't yet, but I promised to keep him informed and call him regularly. We exchanged words of love and support, and I assured him that I would take care of myself. Ending the call with Michael, I gathered my thoughts for the next conversation and dialed Sarah's number. The sadness in her voice was unbearable as I shared the devastating news about her mother's betrayal. She also struggled to understand how Emily could cause so much pain to our family, similar to what Aunt Jessica had done. Sarah, always direct, broke the silence with a painful question. "Dad, how long has this been going on? When did we stop being enough for her?" I tried to console her, explaining that the duration and reasons no longer mattered. What mattered was that I loved Emily deeply and trusted her completely, and she had destroyed that trust. I assured her that I would be fine. I confessed that I was very sad, but I believed that with time and distance from her mother, I would heal. I promised to share my new address and told her she could visit me when her school year ended. Tears filled my eyes as I made that promise, wishing Sarah knew she would always have a place with me. Upon arriving in Tucson, I found a small but welcoming optical unit with only 30 employees. The district manager, a kind man with a paternal attitude, created a sense of camaraderie and comfort in the team. I felt accepted immediately, which provided some solace during this difficult time. A month later, I chose a charming house in a quiet condominium. During this period, I had no contact with Emily, relying only on updates from my lawyer and my children. Navigating this new life was not without challenges. A particularly difficult situation arose when my lawyer informed me that Emily was willing to contest the divorce. She was not ready to let go and was willing to fight to the bitter end, even if it meant financial ruin for both of us. In response, I calmly instructed my lawyer to stop pursuing the divorce. I told him I no longer cared and wanted to give her the chance to rebuild her life. After the 24 years we shared, I asked him to tell Emily that I no longer wished to continue our relationship and wished her the best. Additionally, I added a sharper message, asking my lawyer if he could tell her to go to hell. Recognizing our close relationship, he agreed, but warned that it would be for an additional fee. Conversations with my children were even more difficult. One by one, I had to convince them there was no turning back. The first major barrier arose when Sarah told me, "Dad, Mom went completely crazy when I mentioned that I planned to live with you this summer." I promised Sarah that I would do my best to visit her and her grandparents, but her reaction was so troubling that I considered it necessary to turn off my phone for a few days. Emily's behavior deteriorated even further when Michael decided to split his summer between us. As for Emily, I consciously refrained from asking questions about her, focusing on moving on with my life. It was not easy, as the remnants of my feelings for her still remained, tied to our shared past before the betrayal. With the help of my children, I gradually learned more about Emily's mental state. To my surprise, she was experiencing deep depression, mirroring the emotional turmoil I had once felt. This was shocking, given what had happened with her sister. When you cheat, you destroy those you should love, causing the ruin of your marriage. After that, you move on with your life. So how could Emily be depressed when I did everything I could to allow her to move on without me? Her reluctance to divorce seemed like an escape from reality, a way to avoid facing the fact that her actions had led to our family's breakup. It was absurd. For a while, I was in denial too, but she had lived in denial for the past 2 years. Although I knew our children maintained regular contact with me, they used them to express remorse for her actions. Through them, she tried to convince me that she was willing to do anything to prove her love. Although I understood that our children hoped for reconciliation, I could not force myself to speak to Emily. The geographical distance between us was also a problem, forcing our children to choose between their mother and me. Emily was relentless in her pursuit of finding out my whereabouts through them. All she knew was that I lived in one of the southern states. Almost 3 years had passed since I left her, and she finally managed to discover my location. One fateful day, as I left work, I noticed her hiding near the office. I could not understand how she had found out where I now lived, as I had tried to keep this information strictly confidential. According to what my children shared, Emily was convinced that a face-to-face meeting would change my mind. Determined to correct her mistake, I quickly and discreetly slipped through a side door. My heart raced as I called Maria to inform her of the situation and my plan. I placed myself where Emily could see me, forcing her to follow me. Navigating through the city, I stopped at a grocery store, pretending to take care of everyday tasks, and finally returned home. As I approached the driveway, Maria, a beautiful Latina woman in her 30s, opened the door with a 1-year-old child in her arms. Emily, who had followed me, parked nearby and hurried towards the house, visibly confused by what she saw. From the kitchen, I watched Emily's surprise as Maria greeted her with a warm smile and a marked Spanish accent. "Can I help you with something?" she asked politely. Emily, visibly bewildered, murmured that she needed to talk to me. Maria called me, and I took the child in my arms as I approached the door. Well, I began, with a mix of surprise and irony in my voice. "What brings you here after almost 3 years?" Emily, with tears in her eyes, whispered that she needed to apologize, confessing how much she regretted the pain she had caused. She admitted that her actions were her own stupidity and expressed her love for me, describing me as the best husband and father a woman could hope for. Although her words were sincere, I knew it was time to put an end to this charade. "Everything is fine," I replied, feigning joy. "All of that is in the past. I'm moving on, and I forgive you." I looked at the child in my arms, his innocent joy shining, and continued, "I wish you a life full of happiness and love, like mine." Emily's tears flowed incessantly as she murmured something incomprehensible. She took a few hesitant steps forward, hugged me briefly, and then hurried out of the house. I closed the door behind her, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Maria, sensing my fragile state, gently took the child from my arms and hugged me tightly. She kissed me on the forehead and then reached for her phone. "I need to inform James that I'll be home soon with our daughter," she said with warmth and confidence. "Thank you, Maria," I whispered, deeply grateful for her support. "Make sure to tell him I expect them for the barbecue on Saturday." "Of course, boss. See you at the office tomorrow," she replied enthusiastically. The following week, My lawyer received the signed divorce papers from Emily. As I moved on, I understood that healing would take time and that I had to find my own rhythm. I formed bonds with several women, entering into non-serious relationships without serious commitments. Gradually, I freed myself from shyness and modesty around women. Recognizing my personal growth, I began to think that maybe it was time to let Maria introduce me to someone special, someone who could bring me true happiness. However, after this unexpected encounter with Emily, doubts began to arise. Not about leaving her, as that decision remained firm, but about my previous assumption that we had nothing more in common. I had always believed we no longer had topics to discuss, thinking she understood my stance on infidelity and how I would react. But hearing fragments of Emily's story during our brief conversation, I wondered if I had avoided the necessary confrontation. Despite my aversion, removing myself from her life was the best course of action. It allowed me to find peace and recover away from the toxic environment that had consumed us. I loved Emily enough to know that if I had confronted her at my most vulnerable moment, I might have succumbed to her remorse and accepted her apologies, leading to more suffering and an eventual divorce. Now, 3 years after her betrayal and our breakup, her apology gave me a sense of closure. It freed me from the remnants of pain and offered me a glimpse of hope to love again. With time, I might even consider revealing that I actually don't have a second daughter, though I'm not sure if I ever will. I no longer owe her anything, and the choice to reveal or keep this to myself is mine alone. Finally, I am free from obligations to her, allowing me to move forward and begin a new chapter in my life. But not for long. Yesterday, I stood by Emily's grave with my children and numerous relatives, including Jessica. I cried bitterly, as did everyone present, but I saw no tears on Jessica's face. Emily, in a state of total despair and intoxication, had a fatal accident. Her life could not be saved. I reflected long on why Jessica pushed her sister into a reckless relationship and came to one conclusion: revenge. Revenge for Emily and me revealing Jessica's infidelity, leading to the end of her marriage to David. Perhaps now Jessica feels some relief, as her sister lies in a coffin. And I know one thing for sure: I will never love a woman as I loved Emily. Bye-bye.